Guten Woch. Welcome to tonight's shiur. Motzei Shabbos, Parshas Lecho. So we're going to start off with something minyone de yoyma. So we have Baruch Hashem every week. There's sichos which are published, sichos of the Rebbe which are published, and for the last 12 years approximately, the Hanoches Belahak who published the sicha, they have been putting letters of the Rebbe which have not been published before, and they've been putting them as an addendum to the weekly pamphlet, weekly booklet, and the plan is that they will produce several volumes of Igres Kodesh with all these letters which have been published bit by bit. So for this week, because it's to do with Rov of Anash, and towards the end of the parsha we have about Bris Milah, so they have three items relating to Bris Milah. And the first two actually, are to my late grandfather, Rebbe Yosef Raskin, who lived in Rishon LeZion, and he was a moil. He was in that area for sure. He was the very popular moil amongst Anash. And he, if those who remember him, he was it was his business to find out, and he would ask the Rebbe various inyonim about Bris Milah, and so there's a number of minhagim of Bris Milah which are thanks to his persistence to ask the Rebbe guidance about them. One of them particularly is about Shechianu, that as you can see on the bottom of the page, we've got here from the Shulchan Aruch, Siman Reish Samech Beis, I think it is. It talks about when the moil does the bris, so he would say Shechianu, if it's the father. And yes, if there's someone else, so say you don't say Shechianu, the Rambam says the father always says Shechianu, and that is indeed the minhag in Eretz Yisrael, Syria, and Mitzrayim. Then the Rambam says, however, Medinos Elu, the minhag of Ashkenaz, is not to say Shechianu. Now, what was happening in Eretz Yisrael? So the community in Eretz Yisrael, because they moved in, the Sephardi community was there before the Ashkenazi community to a large degree, and so the Ashkenazim, when they emigrated to Eretz Yisrael, so they had picked up various minhagim, and so they started saying Shechianu by a bris, at a bris. And now the debate here is, in the Gemara it says that at a bris, unlike by Sheva brachas, we say that by the zimun we say shehasimcha b'ma'oinoi. So by a bris, it says in Gemara not to say shehasimcha b'ma'oinoi mipnitzara diyinuka, because of the child is after all is suffering the pain of the bris milah. So shechianu is said when there's a simcha. So since there is here the simcha has somehow compromised by the tzara diyinuka, so that's why the Ashkenazim don't say Shechianu, whereas the Sephardim do. Fine. Meanwhile, here's a letter which Maaser had written to the Rebbe, and the Rebbe writes is Elul Tafshin Chaf. And I'm skipping, he mentions Maaser's name, and then the Shalom Avrocha, and then the second paragraph. You're writing about Minhagi Anash v'negei lebris milah. The Rebbe says, I do not have a tradition, a Mesorah on this particular point, the points which you're asking. Therefore, you should be mevarer etzel ziknei Anash. You should verify amongst the elders of Anash. Asher bevadei zochrim haminhagim, certainly remember the minhagim of this midday shelifnei. So they will remember what was done in the previous generation. Amongst various Baalei Shmua, which I'll come back to in a moment. So what was his question? Now, this is interesting. Now, Maaser was born 1 year before the Rebbe. So in Tafshin Chof, he was 60. Born in Tafresh Samach Aleph, whatever. And he says, my good friend Rebbe Khan, that's Rebbe's father, who was also similar age, if not older. And Rebbe Folia Khan had said, they see by the Bris, they're making these Pesukim, this midday Shalayim to say Shema Yisrael, and Hashem Melech twice, and on Hashem Shiur Slichano, and then about the Shechion. So he's asking whether, and so Rebbe Folia Khan was asking, why am I doing this? When I do a Bris, why am I doing these minhagim? And so Mazeda asks the Rebbe, and the Rebbe says, "Be mavarid sil zikni anash." Now that's what I'm finding interesting. If he was 60 years old, he would have also remembered Bris in Russia, even 15 years before. He came out in Tovshin Zayin. So why couldn't he remember himself? Whatever. But what I found particularly interesting is, what is this phrase? Ask Zikni Anash, who will remember from the previous generation, amongst those, all those who are, who have no history, I presume. So what is the Rebbe adding by that? By that phrase, I was struggling with it, and I thought I'd share with you my struggle and suggest that it means the following. You've got Zikni Anash, who would remember presumably what happened in what was done 15, 20, 30 years ago. And then you've got general historians. You've got people, not Lavchana Anash, you've got people who will write down minhagim, describe this kind of stuff, so you can verify by the Bali Shmua what was the minig in Russia, etc., and whether this is a minig from Europe or is a minig which was picked up in Eretz Yisrael. Interesting. Now, then, this is Tov Shin Chof. And in the editor's notes, they write how Mazeda did go to various Zikni Anash and Rabbonim, etc., and asked them what do they remember. It looks like he didn't come to a total clarkite, because 10 years later, he's asking again. You can see the question. He writes, he had written that I've been criticized about saying these Pesukim. This is in Tafshin Lamed, 10 years later. And it's not in the Chabad Siddur. Shechionu, we've stopped drink. That's already from Tafshin Chaf Aleph, when I got the Rebbe's letter from Tafshin Chaf Aleph. But what about the Pesukim? And here the Rebbe sees, I guess, that he's not getting a clarity from the Zikni Anash, and then 10 years later, the Rebbe answers him, okay, so consult the Rabbonim. That is, the Rebbe keeps away from giving any definitive answer. He tells him to consult with the Rabbonim. I don't remember what is done by Bris in Eretz Yisrael. The only thing I do remember is about 45 years ago, and 46 years ago now. Tovshin Lamed Tes, I learned in Kfar Chabad, and Rabbi Yeshua Monshin Olav Shalom was married to my cousin, and they, both he and she are no longer alive, but at the time they made a bris, and there was a younger sister of Mrs. Monsheim, my cousin, and they invited me to be kvater, and she would be the kvaterin. That's the first and last time I've been to a bris where it's not a husband and wife kvater and kvaterin, but cousins, etc. Okay. I was 18 at the time, 19 at the time. I didn't know to ask any questions. They told me what to do, and I just followed instructions. Okay, let's move on. About doing a bris before midday. Is there a source for the emphasis that the Suda should be done before Chatzos? Now, in the Shulchan Aruch, it doesn't in Risamach Beis, it's not written explicitly, but in the footnotes, in the Pischei Tshuva, he brings from the Shvus Yaakov. Shvus Yaakov is a posuk the Alter Rebbe has great respect for. In Hilchos Pesach, he has the Chok Yaakov, which the Alter Rebbe relates to very regularly in Hilchos Pesach. So in his response, he writes, one should object to the Chazonim when there's a Shabbos or a Yom Tov and there's a Bris, and they delay and because they're doing all the chazonas, so they're pushing off the Bris after Chatzos, and then mevatel the mitzvah of Zrizin makdim le mitzvah. So this is the source which where there's emphasis of Chatzos, but actually, if you look into the Shvus Yaakov in the actual Sefer itself, he gives earlier references. He refers to the Aguda who lived in Cologne, in the late Rishonim, quotes the Roikeach, and Shuvas HaGeonim. So this Chatzos thing seems to, I tried to trace that and I didn't manage to. So there is this idea of Zrizin Makdimin. So why is midday the criterion for Makdimin? The earlier the better. So it makes sense that until midday you can still say it's morning. The afternoon already, you can't say it's Makdimin by any stretch because it's already in the afternoon. So there is this emphasis on doing, and the latest you could call it being early is by midday, and so that's the source. Now, then there's a famous letter of the Rebbe, and let me explain what was going on here. This I heard from Rebbe Katznelnbergen, Olav Shalom, that in Russia it was very common. In the summer, if there's a bris, they would make the bris in the late afternoon after people could get back from their work, etc. And there would be a bris, and there would be a fabrengen, and the fabrengen could go on for hours. See, the Mamol, they knew how to enjoy the fabrengen with one another for hours. When they came to Eretz Yisrael, this is now after the war, and how the refugees managed to get out of Russia and came to Eretz Yisrael. So they were continuing this minhag of doing a bris in the late afternoon. Reb Shneir Garelik is the Rov of Chabad, and he's seeing this, and he knows that there's a problem with it because you're meant to do Zrizin Makdimin. By the way, it's not so poshut that the father should be eating a meal before doing a bris. Just like we don't eat before lulav, we don't eat before shofar. You have a mitzvah to do a bris today. You shouldn't be eating before the bris. So Reb Shneir writes a letter to the Rebbe and asking the Rebbe for guidance. And in this letter, it was a famous letter, it's published in the Kudasichas already, in the earlier volumes. And the Rebbe goes through the two values. One is Zrizin Makdim le mitzvah, to do things more earlier, and then Beroiv Om Hadras Melech, to have more people present. And that glorifies the event by having more people present. And which is of those two values? Is it better to do earlier, either with less people, or later with more people? And the Rebbe discusses that, and it looks like that the Zrizin Makdim le mitzvah is the greater value. So then the Rebbe says, however, by Bris, there's a particular emphasis on the inyan of simcha. Both you have they call mitzvah sheblu aleim b'simcha, and then he shows also a reference to, in this letter of the Rebbe, if a bris works out on Tisha B'Av nidche. That means that Tisha B'Av was Shabbos, and then the actual fast is observed on Sunday. There's a halocha, because it's nidche. So then the Avi Haben and the Sandik and the Moyel, they are allowed to break the fast. They are allowed to have the Sudas Mitzvah on Tisha B'Av itself, if it's in the afternoon, something like that. So as a result, it says there that the Tisha B'Av nidche, if there's a bris, you do it later on in the afternoon, so that the Baalei Simcha would be able to have the Sudas Mitzvah. So you see there that the Simcha has in the Bris is overriding the inyan of Zrizin Makdim le mitzvah. So that's the Rebbe brings a raya that it's not an ironclad rule. You see that Simcha, and then Simcha, we know the more people you know adds to the Simcha, and then the Rebbe adds also there can be sometimes if someone can't make it, there'll be a frustration, upset, that couldn't come. Then the Rebbe adds a very beautiful word. There's another consequence of the contingent effect, and that is the Farbrengen. That when you make the later on, then there can be a Farbrengen. And certainly by the Farbrengen, there will be a discussion about Torah mitzvahs and Chassidus, and so the mitzvahs are there to encourage Yirah Shamayim. And therefore, the Rebbe concludes, must be these reasons which I've given, Ladaiti, Shaloilim Noya Beyad HaNoyagim Kanal. If people are doing the Bris later on, because they want to have more simcha, and particularly they're going to be a Farbrengen as a result, so then it's tolerable. So I'm just sharing this with you. Still think but it is a cheshbon. You have to think if you want to make a bris later on in the day, is it going to add to the Farbrengen aspect of it? So is it going to add to the simcha aspect? If it's not going to add, then for sure, then there's reason makdim el mitzvah would be the guidance. Okay, let's move on to a totally new question. So I've got this fellow who bought a house by some resort, and Baruch Hashem, he doesn't need it for a whole year round, so he'll use it occasionally, a couple of weeks a year, 3 weeks a year. The rest of the time, it'll be up for rental. It's a resort, so during various vacation times, it'll be rented out. Rented out to Eden, rented out to Goyim. How he's going to work with the kashrus, he didn't ask. But meanwhile, he's asking about mezuzah. So I own a house, freehold, it's a mortgage, doesn't matter. It's his house, and he's renting it out here and there to Goyim and to Eden. Does he have to put up mezuzos? So here's an interesting point. There's a difference between Eretz Yisrael and Chutz La'aretz. In Eretz Yisrael, if you rent, let's go first to Chutz La'aretz. In Chutz La'aretz, if you rent a space for less than 30 days, you don't have to put up a mezuzah. In Eretz Yisrael, even if you rent for a short term, you have to put up a mezuzah. But there's something called Hador Bepundak, one who's living in a hostel. Then, up till 30 days, if you're living in a hostel, so it's less than rental. It's a hostel, it's like less, I guess, whatever it is, less permanent or less private. So then, up to 30 days, even in Israel, you don't have to put up a mezuzah. So here, in Hilchas Mezuzah, the Aruch HaShulchan says like this. That's talking about when the landlord, the owner of the hostel, is a goy. So he doesn't have to put a mezuzah. The tenant who comes in for a very short term also doesn't have to put a mezuzah. But if the owner of the hostel is a Eid, so he has to put up mezuzahs in the rooms of the orchim, because he's the host, so he has a duty to put up mezuzahs. So if you are, yes, I don't know what is done with the Jewish-owned hotels if they are not catering to a Jewish clientele. What do they do about mezuzahs? But meanwhile, perhaps they have got Goyish partners. I don't know how they work. But meanwhile, on a simple thing, a simple level, you own a dwelling, even though you're going to have Goyish guests, Jewish guests. But it's a dwelling, it's yours, so you should be putting up a mezuzah, especially since you are going to be using it. Those 2 weeks in the year, 3 weeks in the year, he's the owner. Our owner has to put up mezuzahs. There's no shortcut on that. So this is from a sefer. I've mentioned this many times. Sefer Seichel Torah, a specialist sefer on mezuzah, and so it seems clear that one would have to. The owner of this house would have to put up a mezuzah. Mezuzahs. What I did say to him, wrote to him, that if you are concerned that the non-Jewish guests may possibly cause damage, disgrace the mezuzahs, so there is a way of putting up mezuzahs in a discreet way. And also, a few years ago, the Shliach in Dublin, Reb Zalman Lent, produced a product which is called camuzuza, a camouflage of mezuzah. It looks like a sensor, a magnetic release system, or something. It's like a black and white, different options. And it has inside the mezuzah, it has a little shin, a graphic there. And so there's a way of having a mezuzah, and the person who doesn't know, doesn't realize, will just see it's some kind of sensor. Now, of course, the old way, which is mentioned in Kitzur Shulchan Aruch, you could take cut away the door stopper, the wood, and put it behind there. But this is another, perhaps a simpler and cheaper way to do it. Right, let's move on. So here is a question a young man asks me. If he buys stuff in various supermarkets, he gets Nectar points. So he says, do I have to give Maaser on my Nectar points? That was his question. So before we come back to the Maaser, Reb Gershon is asking, Mezuzos is choybas hador. Surely the goy isn't mechuyev. That's absolutely true. So your question might be, if I have, let's say, a dwelling which is just for a goy, then you can so the choybas hador means it's that the if the balabos doesn't put it up, the tenant has to put it up. But it doesn't mean that the balabos doesn't have to put it up. But if I have just goyim using there, then yes, if I own a property and I'm renting out to a goyish a tenant, he doesn't need to have mezuzah. But here he's using it a couple of weeks a year, and he's having also Jewish guests, so that doesn't acquit him from chiyuv mezuzah. Okay, let's come back to the nectar points. So does he have to give Maaser on nectar points? Nectar points apparently have got a value, and you can use them in this shop or perhaps in other shops. You can get various gifts with them. Now, some of you who have some white hairs will remember Green Shield stamps. Any thumbs up for that? So now the when you especially went to on Tuesdays to Moses supermarket, you'd get double Green Shield stamps, and you'd fill up several books, and then you go to some shop and you'd get a clock or a suitcase or a watch. Oh, okay, so are you obliged to give Maaser on these types of things, on the nectar points? So what I responded to him is like this. It depends what you're going to spend the points on. If you're going to spend it on going to Legoland or going to Madame Tussauds or something, or buying something which you would not have bought otherwise. Oh, you got this free points, you're going to do this, but it's not something which you would have budgeted for otherwise. If that's the case, that kind of gift, you do not have to give Maaser. But if you're going to use those points on something which you would have bought otherwise, you need to buy a suitcase. Okay, I'll use the Nectar points to get a suitcase. So otherwise you would have forked out the £30 from your pocket. Now these £30 stays in your pocket. So then you've earned £30. If that's the case, there's more room to say that's called an earning, a gift of money, a cash gift, and then you should be giving Maaser. I'm not totally confident with this. We discussed it over the Shabbos table. That possibly you could say, no, well, actually, it's a discount. If I go to the supermarket and it happens to be a discount, so I've saved £3. I don't have to start giving Maaser on the £3. I've got a discount, yeah. So you could look at these nectar points as saying they're giving you a discount if you can now spend the money in the same shop and get the X amount for cheaper. So then perhaps you could say it's not really in earnings. All right, okay, I can see the argument. So someone's asking, what about air miles? Yeah, it's a similar question. Similar question. You see, one way you can say is they're giving you a gift in order to incentivize that you should, next time you fly, you should fly with the Star Alliance rather than with whatever else, the other airlines. So it's a gift. Or do you see it as a discount? If it's a discount, then you don't have to give Maaser on a discount. If it's a gift, then you should. I'm not totally clear about it. All right. When it comes to Maaser, Baruch Hashem, if you manage to have the money to do the spending, you can be machmir a little bit and give a bit more generous of Maaser. Bichlal, the Alter Rebbe brings in Tanya that nowadays we're not so calculated. We're generous with Maaser, with tzedakah bichlal. Yeah. Okay, let's move on. So one of our shluchim here in United Kingdom asks me, do French windows need to have mezuzah? So just to understand what they are, these are very tall windows. Main thing is that they go almost to the ground, and you could theoretically walk through, but Baruch Hashem, they also have a fence, a grill of some sort. If you're on the second floor, that you shouldn't walk through these tall windows. So they're not really made for walking through. So that's for sure. It doesn't need to have mezuzah. What about if it were on ground floor? And they're not made for walking through. Occasionally, you may, if there's some traffic or you wanted to not see someone, so you might use those windows to go in and out. Yeah. So here we go. We have on the Hilchas Mezuzah, we have a commentary called Das Kedoshim. The Das Kedoshim is the Bechocher Rov, and he is dealing with the inyan of Mezuzah should be Yemin HaNichnos. That's always people ask questions, which side the Mezuzah should go. The Mezuzah is on the right as you enter. So now he gives the following comments. A window, if even though you walk through it, but since it's not made for that, the window is part of the Mezuzah. Point number one. Point number two, he says, therefore, it's not an issue to say, oh, it's that the room is influenced on Yamin HaNichnos, because you go throughout the window. What I think he is saying is the following. When you have a door which swings out to the corridor, so minhag ha'olam is you put the mezuzah on the right as you enter the room. Minhag Chabad is that you would put the mezuzah on the left as you enter the room, but which is the right as you'd go through that when you push the door, when you walk through the corridor. So that's this famous minhag Chabad to follow Heker Tzir. And what's the argument? And you can see here, Lecho the Rebbe, that we follow Heker Tzir as per some Rishonim. And in the case, there were people that asked the Rebbe and the Rebbe Marash, it was apparently, what do you mean? If all the doors are opening out, how do you get into the room? So he said, come enter through the window. So the fact that there's a window to get into the room allows you to say that the door to the corridor is going out from the room to the corridor. And you put the mezuzah as you're going from the room to the corridor. And I think this is the very point which the Bechocher Rov is disagreeing with. He's saying that the window is not made for walking in and out, and therefore it doesn't count to have a influence on what's called Yamin HaNichnos. In the same volume of the Das Kedoshim, we've got another commentary called Gedolei Hekdesh, where he writes, he says, you don't need to have a mezuzah on a window, it's just like a hole. But if it's taka made for walking, it's going to consider Pesach. Then he talks about if it's a window which is more than 10 tefachim off the ground, another discussion. Okay, so what I'm seeing here is that they're dismissing the use of a window. It doesn't need to have a mezuzah, but that's because, and as a result, it doesn't affect Heker Tzir. But according to our minhag, Yeah, I don't think it's going to change the halacha as far as the window goes. But it's interesting that in our minhag we would take the window in consideration when it comes to calculating about heketzir. Just there's this ongoing debate between Rabboni Chabad. What happens if you have a room which does not have a window and the door opens out? So in Eretz Yisrael, you've got now all over, they've got a secure room, cheder mamad, whatever they call it. And typically, there's not going to be windows, or not windows which you can go through the window. And it's got a heavy duty door, and that door swings out. So if it's a freestanding structure, for sure, you put the mezuzah on the right as you enter. What about if it's, let's say, the basement? Would you put the mezuzah on the right as you enter? Because that's the only way you can go in. Or you say, no, yeah, since the door opens out, so you follow Heketzir. And so there's the debate amongst Rov of Anash whether in that case, when there's no window, when the Rebbe said, all right, so go through the window, were they just being a little bit, how do you say, dismissive? Or that was precise? It was deliberate, that the window makes the difference whether you can go, which side you put the mezuzah. My personal take on it is to put it on the right as you enter such a room. It can be also a walk-in fridge, possibly. It's another discussion whether you need a mezuzah on a walk-in fridge. But my take on it is the following. I know that other poskim will for sure say you put it on the right as you enter. What minhag Chabad is, I'm going to say it's 50-50. Yeah, doesn't matter. It's 30-70. It doesn't matter. But it's not clear what minhag Chabad is. So there's a rule in Halocho, Bori V'Shem and Bori Odif. If you have one position which is clear, which is confident, the other one you're not clear, so you follow that which is clear. So that's why when people ask me this question, if you have a room which has a door swinging out, and the room does not have any window to talk about, to be able to get in through the window, so then I would say ignore the heketzir and put the mezuzah on the right as you enter. Let's move on. The idea of a mezuzah, sorry, the idea of a window being an entrance comes up in Hilchos Eruvin. If you have two houses which have a party wall, sharing a wall, and you want to make an Eruv, so if there's a window at some level between the two rooms, between the two houses, then that's considered a Pesach, and you can join the two houses with an Eruv. So in some respects, a window is also counted as a Pesach, not for mezuzah, but for other areas of halacha. Let's move on. So we have a situation, a teacher who teaches Chumash to young children, and she makes a photocopy of the Pesukim, which is doing with them, and the children have exercise books, and they're going to take each one takes their copy and they paste it into the book. Very nice, beautiful. Then she realizes that, and some of those in those Pesukim, in one copy, has Hashem's name written, Yud Kei Vav Kei. So now the exercise book, the children have Yud Kei Vav Kei stuck in their exercise book. She knows at the end of the year, some children are likely to discard their books. And so now she's indirectly causing that the children will be disgracing Hashem's name by throwing it out in the waste. So very honorable question. So she's asking, perhaps she should make little stickers with Hashem's name, just with a hey, and in each child's book she'll put on a sticker, and in that way the Yud Kei Vav Kei will not be disgraced. So I responded to her that that's not acceptable because sticking on a sticker itself is erasing. So you can see here, this is from this is in Mishnah Berurah Siman Lamed Beis, and you have here from the Bia Halocha, he quotes Reb Kiva Eger, that you have a Jewish bookbinder. He's repairing a siddur, and he needs to use some kind of sticky paper. They didn't used to have sellotape, which was see-through. They would use like a very thin paper, I guess. He calls it pap, which I don't know what that means. But they used to take perhaps a grease thin paper and stick it over. So he says you put it on the stronger parts, and that way you repair the tears. But meanwhile, the sticking is going to be also affecting shemus kedoshim, which mustn't be erased. So sticking paper on Hashem's name, is effectively erasing it. Now, here's interesting, not exactly the way I said. I said that by sticking on the sticker, you've erased it. Here he says slightly different. He says, you cannot, if you peel off the sticky paper, you're going to have to pick up inevitably a bit of the ink. So he doesn't see necessarily the sticking as the erasing, but who says you have to pick up the sticker? But all right, so but he has a problem with sticking, Bekitzer. And therefore he says, on the actual name of Hashem, put on a piece of paper without a sticker, without any glue, and then you'll put on like a bridge over it, and that's how you'll repair your book. If you remember, many of you will remember, around Tofshin Memvov, the Rebbe came out with a issue with the Pasuk of Roimemu. When it comes to taking out the Sefer Torah, Hashem Agdullah, in that paragraph, and it says Reimu Hashem Lekeinu. So the Rebbe pointed out that he noticed that in some Sidurim, Chabad Sidurim, he had only one Pasuk Reimu. And really, the Rebbe is saying that it should be two Pesukim Reimu. There's two Pesukim Reimu Hashem Lekeinu Shtachel Adim Ragel Kodeshu Reimu Hashem Lekeinu Shtachel Hakodesh Kodesh Hashem Lekeinu. And so the Rebbe said they should be addressed in the future. I don't remember what he said, in future prints probably. But what happened to all these Sidurim which had it missing? So some people started making stickers of that paragraph to put in a sticker which has the both Pesukim. So in the old Tilas Hashem Siddur, anything which is earlier than that, Tofshin Mem Hey or earlier, you take a look at those older Sidurim. So you'll see like this. In the Shabbos davening, so that the Pesukim Reimamu have there Yud Kei Vav Kei 3 times. Usually in the Tilas Hashem Siddur, Hashem's name is spelled Yud Yud. But occasionally it's spelled Yud Kei Vav Kei, and that's because when they crafted it together in Tofshin Hey, some parts, mostly the part took from one Siddur, from Vilna print, to Seder Avodah Tov Resh Ayin Aleph. But when there were some things which are a little bit, which not mamish, you needed several changes, and in Torah it was more straightforward, so they copied it from Torah Siddur. So in this piece, and the Shabbos davening, that piece is from the Torah Siddur, and it has Yud Kei Vav Kei, so it's to stick over a piece of paper, a sticky paper over a paragraph which has got Yud Kei Vav Kei. So we're seeing here that's not allowed because it's erasing Hashem's name by putting the sticker. So back to this teacher, I told her instead of putting a sticker, she should ask the children for their exercise books, take out the piece of paper which they had stuck in, which has got Hashem's name, and she'll give them another one, new one, which has got, without Hashem's name in the copy. Okay, let's move on to our next question. What do we have here? Okay, number 7. Folding talesim in shul on Shabbos in order to neaten up the space. So this discussion goes back all the way to the Mishnah. You can see here in the Mishnah Perek Tazayin of Shabbos, I think it's Daf Kufnun, no, that's earlier, Kuf Lamed somewhere. Mekaplin as hakelim, you are allowed to fold garments, even 4 or 5 times. You're allowed to make the beds. Milele Shabbos la Shabbos. On Friday night, you're allowed to fold clothing, and you're allowed to make beds to prepare Friday night for Shabbos. Avaloi mi Shabbos la mitzvah Shabbos. You're not allowed to fold clothing on Shabbos for Motzei Shabbos. You're not allowed to prepare a bed on Shabbos for Motzei Shabbos. So, well, that's you're not meant to prepare on Shabbos for after Shabbos, so you wouldn't be allowed to fold. Now, here we have two quotes from the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch. One is Siman Shin. It's a chapter which talks about Motzei Shabbos, Mlava Malka, etc. And it has here, Yeshmi, there were those Medaktikim, those who were particular to have a separate talus for Shabbos, and Motzei Shabbos, they would fold the talus, Kadelis Asik b'mitzvah miyad, to engage with a mitzvah right after Shabbos. We'll come back to that later. It's there's a well-known, whether it's true or not, but it's well-known saying that folding your talus on Motzei Shabbos is a segula for Shalom Bayis. I think also helping out with washing the dishes and clearing up the house or looking after the children is also probably an effective segula for Shalom Bayis. Okay, at any rate, that's in Siman Shin, as I said. And then we have in Siman Shin base, which is a siman which talks about clothing on Shabbos. And he writes here, you can see the end of Siv Ches. Therefore, also kapel talus shel mitzvah. You're not allowed to fold your talus, which you've taken off Shabbos morning, unless you're going to use the talus again for mincha. And then he goes on in more detail. Even if you wanted to use it on Shabbos, it would be limited only one person alone, not two people. And because when two people are together folding a garment, they're going to do a more thorough job. And then he has here further in that Sif Tes, Yesh Mishu Omer, to fold not on the original folds, that is okay, even if it's not for today, and even if it's two people, and it's etc. Because if it's not on the original folds, then it's not going to last, and that's not called a tikkun keli, v'nirin dvarov. So he seems to accept that if you fold it not on the original folds, okay, but not in the original folds, we have a problem. Right, so now he says there is some Bichlal apprehension about folding Shaloka Seder if it's not needed for Shabbos. Because after all, you're doing an effort on Shabbos, so not needed for Shabbos. But Negei Hadova L'Maisa, this one Pisket Shuvas. Folding the talis right after davening, not in the original folds. So there are those who are Mekel, but there are those who say you should be Machmir. And then he refers to what he's written earlier in Ois Tes. A garment which there's no tielis from folding it. Let's say it's not like on the original folds, or it's something like a jumper, a sweater, blankets, which it doesn't really make a difference to the quality of the garment. Yesh Omrim, that even this is only allowed only letzorech hayom, not for tomorrow, because it's a tircha on Shabbos. Others are matir, even if you don't intend to use them today, because it's not really significant, this folding. So again, we're talking here about folding not on the original folds. On the original folds, I don't see any heter. Not on the original folds, there, it seems to be, as you can see, the Alter Rebbe seems to be saying, Nirin Dvorov, that would be okay. Now, those who are apprehensive, because it's not L'tzarech Shabbos. Now, his apprehension is this Anshe Maaser. He's quoting from Reb Chaim Noah. So here you can see Reb Chaim Noah in Simon Kuf Yud Zayin. The kapel to fold garments shaloika say to keep a lorishin. Muta b'chol inyan, to fold not in the original folds. That's for sure okay. The Anshe Maaser not to fold even shaloika seder. Not to fold the talis at all on Shabbos, even not in the original folds. Keino isi noyagin. And the reason he says, according to Machzah Shekel, that you want to be machmir, that's preferable. And also, there are ignorant people who see you folding, and they don't know that you're folding Shaloi Kaseder Hadishan. And they will fold Kaseder Hadishan. And he says, what we had before, the Maharil, who would fold he had a special talis for Shabbos, and he folded it Motzei Shabbos. He says, that's not a raya. It could be that he folded on Shabbos shaloi keseder, and once a Shabbos he folded it keseder. But meanwhile, what we're seeing here is they're folding it shaloi keseder. We have room to be makel. But folding it keseder, I don't see anyone who's makel. As you can see, it goes back to the Mishnah, and then it's written in Shulchan Aruch that you shouldn't be folding a talus, even if it's just to tidy up the room. But all right, so shaloi keseder is there's a heter. The Torah HaShabbos, yeah. So the Torah HaShabbos shaloi not on the folds is a heter, but on the folds there doesn't seem to be a heter even the Torah HaShabbos, because that is enhancing the garment. Okay, let's move on. So someone asked me if someone had a hernia operation, does he need to say Birchas HaGoimel? So the general take on this is, I said, if it was a general anesthetic, then for sure you'd have to say Birchas HaGoimel. And so this is from the Sefer Nishmas Avram, from Dr. Avram Sofer, and he says, he quotes Rebbe Yashiv saying that any operation, if it was only if it was general anesthetic. So Dr. Avram Sofer, he says, we can do some very, very dangerous interventions, like a biopsy from inner organs, and that's just with a local anesthetic. So he questions this, whether that should be the criterion, general anesthetic. But general anesthetic, everyone agrees that it would be would warrant Birchas HaGoimel. And if it wasn't, so then if it's a dangerous procedure, then you'd say Birchas HaGoimel. He mentions here about ballooning, whatever that is, with the arteries. He says that would also warrant Birchas HaGoimel. I didn't want to put the second question on the list, but here's a question which I also got this past week. If someone almost he did something to take his own life, and then he was saved from this. Perhaps he took an overdose. I'm not sure what the details were, and then was saved. Does he have to say Birchas HaGoimel? And so here again, this is from the same sefer from Nishmas Avram. A choyle who had some mishagas at some moment tried to take his own life, and he was saved from that. He should say a Birchas HaGoimel when he recovers. And then he goes on to say anyone who has a psychiatric imbalance in a severe way, and if they recover from it, if and when they recover, so then they should be saying Birchas HaGoimel. Right. That was question number 8. Question number 9, about warming up a cold potato kugel by placing it on top of a pot that is sitting on the blech. Let's clarify something. There's bishul and there's nirakim avashal. To put something on the cooking surface, that's nirakim avashal, and that's not okay. But if you put it, what I call double decker, you put it on top of a pot, on top of the urn, that's not nirakim avashal. That problem is solved. But is it mavashal? So if there's a rule that a fluid, a mashke in a fluid is yesh bishul acha bishul bedovalach, which means if a fluid became cold and it was reheated, so then it's subject to the din of bishul. So reheating a liquid, reheating is not okay, even double decker. It's not nirkim mavashal, but it is mavashal, yeah. So now here's the question: what is the criterion? Does moisture in a food qualify as liquid? That's really the question here. We've got here a kugel, which has got some oil in it, and it's going to be warmed up. It's going to be greasy, and then now the greasy kugel is going to be hot. Is that called heating liquid, or is it heating a solid? That's the question. So I'm looking here from the Alter Rebbe's Loshen in the Siddur. in the Hilchos Rabsul Shabbat, and where he's quite emphatic not to reheat cold meat in a situation of a clearation, etc. And he says, because you're going to warm up that meat, and then there's going to be liquid, and if that comes to Yad Seledesba, it becomes hot, then you've cooked. And look at those words. Im mischamem hamoihal hanimche mehem ad shehayad seledesba. If the fluid which melts away from the chicken or meat, whatever, if hanimche mehem, which melts away from it, if that becomes yad seledesba, then you violated the cooking of Shabbos. It's a skill of a chorus chas v'shalom. So it seems to be clear that it's not talking about the fluid which is still in the food. It's talking about the fluid which flows away from the food. Now, not to rely just on the diuk haloshen, here you have also from the Piskei Teshuvos, who says pretty much the same thing. You have a tavshil, which is basically a mass, but it has moisture, kugels. It could be other things, kashes, whatever, schnitzels. That he says that's defined as a dover yovesh. Even though he writes, even though sometimes a little bit of juice will flow. Actually, I take exception to that, because if there's going to be room for the liquid to, let's say you put a tin with some cold chicken, and then you come back half an hour later, and there's a bit of gravy in the bottom of the tin. That's exactly what the Alter Rebbe was concerned about. If it becomes a separate entity, then as a liquid, a hot gravy, then you've got a problem of bishul on your hands. But if it's a kugel, which in a tin, the moisture is not going to come as a separate thing. It's going to remain within the mass, and I don't see a problem of bishul there. Right. Let's come back to feedback to. We had a discussion, was it last week or 2 weeks ago, about answering Omein to the Birchas Koyanim, and whether the Chazan answers Omein. And we had last week, we had about the Mishnah, it talks about it, it could be making him confused. And if he has a siddur in front of the conclusion was he answers Amen. But what about the actual, the first bracha? Sheket shonu b'kedushosa shalarin v'tzivonu levorach es ama Yisrael b'ava. So the rest of us answer Amen. What about the Chazan? Should he answer Amen to that bracha? So this is discussed in the Taz. Kol makom nira li, that's in Simon Kuf Chof Ches, in the dinim of Birchas Koyanim. In Echa mizeh be'inyan manias Omen achas Birchas Koyanim horishoino, she levorich es Amo Yisrael. Al zeh yuchel ashas la'anis Omen. The Chazan can answer that Omen, kevan de loy have a hefsek. It's not a problem of hefsek. The Ikar Chashash is in the Yevarecha Chayoy, that's where there's a worry of confusion, etc. But in the actual, to answer the Omen of the Sheket Shonu is not a problem of Hefsek. Now, the Alter Rebbe writes so clearly, Aval B'acha Birchas HaSheket Shonu, Shebishos Shel Aaron, Yesh Mi Shematir, La'anes Omen, Afilu Lefi Min Agenu. He says it's okay. And I'm sharing this with you because it's not so straightforward. Looking here in the Mishnah Brura, in Sifkot and Ayin Aleph, Ve'al Omen Shel Habrocha of Hasheket Shon B'Kishos Shel Aaron, there are those who are machmir that you shouldn't answer because of hefsek. Birchas Koyanim, that's not a hefsek, because your Omen is, the Chazan is answering Omen, is Kabbalas HaBrocha. Yes, I want to accept the brocha. But the brocha Sheket Shonu, that's a Kohanim. We make a brocha on the mitzvah they're doing. What's that got to do with the Chazan? So that's what the Mishnah Brura writes. And he says, I know that the Taz says you are allowed to, but the El Yerabba and others disagree. All right, so the Mishnah Brura says that the Chazan shouldn't answer Amen to the brocha Bechas HaMitzvahs, the Alter Rebbe quotes the Taz, and he said, Yesh Mishamatir. He doesn't disagree with it. So I think we can remain that it's not a hefsek. It's not a foreign entity. It belongs over here, and therefore it's not a problem of hefsek. Now, I've left the something which came up just this Friday, about an hour before Shabbos, 2 hours before Shabbos. Please, can you give me an answer, an urgent question? So this is a Chabad, a rabbi in a Chabad house on campus. He's in the United States, and he sends me this picture that the students, which is one of the beautiful things they do on campus, they get the students to prepare stuff for Shabbos, make challahs, and here, especially now in the current climate, it's very important for the to give chizuk for the students, the Jewish students on
The
campus.
screen share has stopped, Dayan
Oy vey.
Raskin.
Oy vey. I'm going to have to. All right, I'll do that again. Try again. Screen share. This is and them kemenish mevata sein this. Can you see it now?
No, I had it before. Yeah, it's okay.
Okay. Baruch Hashem. So now we've got here. You can see on the screen these beautiful cookies, heart-shaped, and the students had decorated them with icing, and then they wrote on them, I heart you, I love you, and then they have XOX on some of them. And so now the rabbi on campus, the shliach, nafshe v'shelosai, I know the Alter Rebbe doesn't agree with it, but is there any heter for these students to be able to enjoy these cookies, these biscuits on Shabbos? I have to admit that I did not know what XOX means. But some younger people told me Friday night that X, I means it's kisses, and O means embraces, hugs, hugs and kisses. Okay. So now we've got I love you, and then we've got this XOX. So are they allowed to have these cookies on Shabbos? Is there any way we can be matir? So you can read here, this is in Siman Shin Mem, the Alter Rebbe writes about writing and erasing, but even if you erase without it, writing, also you wouldn't be midrabanon, moichik shelo manas lichtos os. Therefore you mustn't break a uga, a cake, which has got writing on it, even though you're just intending to eat, because you're moichik, but you are allowed to give it to a child, because a child is doing lahana osa, ein tzorich lahafrish. Now this din of the writing on cookies is written before in the Ramah, and it goes back to Rishonim 700 years ago or more. And the original discussion about this was that they would do hachnosa. I think I've discussed this in shiur in the past. That they do hachnosa lecheder. They would do it on Shavuos, and they would prepare the like hachnosa lecheder. You have a cake which has Pesukim. So they did hachnosa lecheder on Shavuos, and they give the children cake which has got writing on it. And that became the whole issue. Are you allowed to give the child something which is going to be eating and erasing the writing? So that's why giving it to a tinnik becomes relevant. So the Ramah says you shouldn't be eating cookies which have in them oisius. Comes along the Taz, he says, I doesn't fully understand. It's shleimanas lichtoim, it's der chachila. Then we've got the Dogul Mervava, the Noida Behuda. And he writes the following. He says it's perfectly okay. The Maram was machmir. That's because, in other words, he's saying it's moichel k'shalyam anachnis lichtoi, which is drabonon, and it's moichel k'shalyam anachnis lichtoi, and it's a psik reisha, which you're not interested. Therefore, it should be okay. Why was the Maram in Rutenburg machmir on this? Because it wasn't unintended. There you wanted the child to eat the posuk. He had the right written on the cake, you had Pesukim, and then the child would eat it. It would be a skula that they're eating the posuk. And therefore, there was an argument it is intended for the children because they're tinoikas, because they're under bar mitzvah, therefore they can be mekel. Aval bialmo, when there's no interest in dafka ingesting the writing, it's not your focus, then it's a mutter even for adults. Now I remember something about putting it in your mouth all in one go. I couldn't find that today. But meanwhile, the Noda Behuda is Mekel. But one last thing which I was thinking about. We know that the minimum of a writing on Shabbos is 2 letters. So the cookies which say you, so Y-O-U is 3 letters, so there's Isser of Mechik. What is this XOX? Now I've been educated, so now I know what these words, but it's 3 separate words. Is that considered writing? In other words, when you have a koisef teosius, does that mean when you go av, bo, she, and mem, because shame, don, dalad, nun, don, etc., it's 2 letters forming a word. But what would be if you have letters which just represent? Like a tof stands for truma, mem stands for Maaser, and so if it's just 1 letter, is that also considered a word? Because you understand. Look, you see the tof. So there's a sefer which I have called Yesodei Yeshurim from Rabbi Gedalia Felder from Toronto. So he's got a whole volume about Lametes Malachas, and he's taking a view that even 1 letter, if it's got a meaning to it, would also be significant. So I'll just finish off with this. I just found this very, very interesting. When David HaMelech is Gemara in Sukkah, when David HaMelech is preparing the foundations for the Beis Hamikdash, the whole story in Gemara Sukkah, how he's digging very, very deep, and he finds a otzitz. He finds a basket which is it says on the basket, it says, "Don't pick me up. If you pick me up, you're going to cause flooding." And of course, David HaMelech picks it up, and then there starts flooding, and then there's a whole story how his Achitophel was forced to say a solution for this. Now, this is the Marsha in Sukkah. So this is all got to do with the Mayim Tachtonim, which actually I spoke about this morning in Shul. The Mayim Tachtonim, which were surging up, and Hashem told them to stay behind, to stay down. And then we have here that Achitophel's answer was, write Hashem's name on a chaspa, on a shard, and put it there, and that will cause the waters to subside. And that solved the problem. Okay, but what was actually written on that shard? So we have it says in Pirkei Avos, Halobin Chaveirei, Afilo Ois Achas, also he has to call him Rabbi Elu from Yodoi. And one of the proofs is from Achitophel, because he only taught David 1 thing, and David calls him. I don't know Schneider, what was it? Anyway, David calls him Rabbi Elu from Yodoi. So what was the Ois Achas? It says Ois Achas. So Marsha is suggesting the Ois Achas is the Hey of Hashem's name, because Yud Kei Yutzu Elamim, Yud Nivra Elam Abo Behei Nivra Elam Hazeh. So the Hey is the Hey of Brias Olam, of Brias Olam Hazeh, and that Hey is written on the Chaspa, and that caused the water to subside. So from this Yesodei Yeshurim, Rav Felder wants to say, aha, you see that even a single letter of Hashem's name also has got a kedusha, and it's got a power, according to the Marsha, and therefore this is once he wants to come back. When you have even a single letter with a stroke on top, which is indicative that this is symbolizing a whole word, should be considered as if you had written a word. And so, all right, that I'm sure that can be is debatable, but that's that he leaves us with that. That's his view. Lahachmir. At any rate, someone's writing, weren't the original Oisius written in the Midvar 2 letters that were on the kroshim rather than words? Very good. That the Gemara talks about. Where do we know the inyan of this? The inyan of 2 letters. When you had 2 kroshim, you had, let's say, an aleph on one and an aleph on the other, and they knew how to match the 2 to one another. That's what you suggested. So but there's two oisius which kind of together have a message. But here you have the X is a message on its own, and the O is a message on its own. So does that count as a writing? Because the letters are standalones. Okay, and you have to finish off with Reb Gershon. He says that's how the cookie crumbles. Okay, thank you very much for joining us tonight, and I wish you all a wonderful week, and we should be zocher to see B'shuv Hashem Shivas Tzion, and that will be Shiach Tzidkenu v'Meheirav Yameinu Mamish.
Good luck.
Amen.
Thank you very much. Shkoyach.
Halt.
Ja, goed wel.